Welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar presentation brought to you from Parabos. Parabos is Australia's resource for the control of worms, lice, flies and ticks. My name is Fiona MacArthur and I'm a member of the Parabos extension team. So it's wonderful to have you all here today. Parabos, for those of you who don't know, is a joint initiative by Australian Wool Innovation, Meat and Livestock Australia, the University of New England and Animal Health Australia. Today, we're collaborating with AWI and we're very excited to bring you AWI's webinar, It's Fly Time. And today, we're very lucky to be joined by Dr. Tim Gole, who I'll introduce in a moment, to present today's presentation. Just a little reminder for those of you who are new to this platform, the webinar is being recorded, so that link will be put onto YouTube and shared with you all later on. It's now time to get Tim's presentation up on screen, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite Tim to share his presentation for us. While I do that, I just might introduce you, Tim, a bit formally in case anyone hasn't met you yet, but you all should be quite familiar with Dr. Tim Gole. He's a veterinarian with over 15 years experience with sheep throughout New South Wales, Queensland and the United Kingdom. He now resides in Western New South Wales over in Dubbo and is the principal of a production and consulting firm focusing on sheep, and it's aptly named, and for those of you who know Tim's humour, for flock's sake. So welcome, Tim. It's lovely to have you on our Parabos webinar series. Thank you for joining us today.
Great, Fiona. Thanks for having me. And we're all busy people, so thank you for making time, everyone, to come on board. It's fly time. So I suppose as we go forward, welcome to it. Basically today will be a revision for a lot of people, but also hopefully I'd like to showcase and signpost, I suppose, some of the exciting things that are coming through the pipeline and where to find some really good information. So it's been brought to you by Australian Wool Innovation as part of a newly released It's Fly Time information package. And it's really designed to help wool growers prevent, monitor and treat. And we're going to talk a lot about that fly strike over the coming months during the risk period. We're probably, just, getting geared up. This is going to be, a parasite paradise for large parts of the eastern seaboard, particularly, coming forward. So chance favours prepared, and having a plan and getting on the attack is what today is all about. But at this package, we're going to talk a little bit about short-term measures, which can be introduced as we kind of go through. So, like I said, prevention, monitoring, treatment, that's what we're going to talk about. At the end of each section, we'll have a quick break and if you've got any questions, fire them away to Fiona and she can facilitate them through. So, thanks for Fiona's introduction. I'm very excited to be part of the sheep industry. I've been running my business called For Flock's Sake for the last 2 years. It's going super well. Our purpose is to help producers grow their best sheep and make every year a winner, and this is all part of it. So, got a bit ahead of myself. Basically, why do we keep talking about this? We know that fly strike is a very important issue facing today's wool industry. We have recent estimates that fly strike causes production losses of about $227 million per year, costs about $96 million in prevention and treatments. So when we total this up, it's about $323.7 million per year across Australia, and that's an average of $4.76 per head. So we know that it's a big drama, and we know that effective management in the short term will be made up of 3 key pillars: the prevention of fly strike, including conditions required for fly strike to occur and some key prevention activities, monitoring fly strike, and treatment options when fly strike occurs. And like I said, having a well-defined and considered plan for fly strike management, which integrates all 3 of these, is the best thing you can do for your animals, for yourself, and for your business, certainly. And again, we want to have a plan and go forward. So during this section, what we're going to cover in prevention is: when is fly strike risk at its highest? What makes sheep susceptible to fly strike? And how do we prevent fly strike? Now, when is fly strike risk at its highest? Fly stroke risk is its highest when conditions are ideal for flies to reproduce and spread. So we basically need 3 basic conditions required for fly strike to occur. 1, we need the presence of susceptible sheep. Second one, we need the enemy on the battlefield. We need the presence of flies. And the third one, we need favourable weather conditions. So going from weather conditions make a massive role in determining the risk of fly strike. The risk of fly strike is greatest during warm and wet conditions. So this usually coincides with spring and autumn, but it can occur throughout the year if climatic conditions make sheep more susceptible to fly strike and favour the fly reproduction. The blowfly life cycle requires temperatures between 15 and 38 degrees. Blowfly eggs will overwinter in the soil, so they can hang out in the soil over winter, and emergence of blowflies after winter is generally controlled by temperature. As soil temperature comes up above 15 degrees, larvae pupate and emerge. Fly activity increases above 17 degrees and peaks between 26 and 36 degrees. So higher than 38 degrees, they become lethargic. So they really have a specific area they really like to operate in. Too hot and too cold, we don't see them as much. Consistent, regular rainfall that keeps the skin of the sheep moist for more than 2 days increases the risk of fly strike, and when there's less opportunity for the skin to dry out. And anyone in Central West and most of New South Wales, I'd gather, probably are facing this right now. Frequent small falls of rain are more conducive to fly strike than occasional heavy downpours. Flies are more active when wind speeds are under 9 kilometres per hour, so they don't really like windy conditions. Fly activity decreases when wind speeds are greater than 9 kilometres an hour, and they really go to ground and stop activity when wind speeds above greater 30 kilometres an hour. And I'll talk about why that's important a little bit later. So that covers the weather conditions in which one of the requirements for fly strike to occur. The next condition is the presence of flies. You'll hear more about our culprit as we go forward, but here is the enemy, Lucilia caprina. It's a pretty name, but this fly, generally known as the Australian sheep blowfly, is responsible for 90% of the fly strike in sheep. Very distinctive looking fly. There's other species of flies that can cause additional damage, which is sometimes more severe, but this is our main enemy. The final requirement of the 3 is the presence of susceptible sheep. Some sheep are more inclined to be struck than others and at more risk than others. And this plays into when you're thinking about how I develop a plan for 2022. The number of susceptible sheep is a key factor influencing the extent of fly strike in the mob. The mob at risk, the more sheep, at risk in the mob, the greater the risk of fly strike. So, righto, what makes sheep susceptible to fly strike? There are a range of factors that make sheep more susceptible to fly strike. This includes breech wrinkle, dags caused by scouring, urine stain, wool cover in the breech area, wool that is yellow, fleece rot and dermatitis, wet and moist wool and skin. So generally that's caused by, rain, dew, chewing, behavior from lice, grass seeds, things like that. Horns, particularly wounds from fighting and trapped moisture around the horn. Afterbirth that's adhered to the breech area, sweaty poles, wounds, and basically any wound caused by skin tears, foot abscesses, dog bites, grass seeds, lice, and foot rot, etc. So, the foot abscess that we're seeing a lot of at the moment, again, it's one of those things that can attract flies. Many of these conditions require moisture for fly strike to occur. Moisture causes the odor, and this combination is attractive to flies. So sheep with dry dags stay in afterbirth are low risk. However, if the breech in the tail gets wet and damp at any time and stays damp, then these can be much greater risk of fly strike. So guidance is basically what we're thinking about. Yellow wool is caused by increase in the swint with dry wool or non-wool grease. The fleece rot, we see flaky and matted mats. Dermatitis is the hard lumpy wool, those wool lumps which are bacteria, and things like that. So What are the other risk factors? Some sheep will be at greater risk of fly strike because their conformation or structure, which leads to their wool staying wet longer. For example, sheep with high and wide shoulder blades, which creates a dip in the shoulder blades, or dipping in the neck, are more susceptible to flea strike and body strike. I think we all know that. And in addition, tail length can also make sheep more susceptible to fly strike, as it impacts the sheep's ability for the breech to dry out. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Some mobs in our flocks will have a different risk profile due to their age or how they've been managed. Lambs and weaners are our higher risk animals compared to mature sheep. And why is that? Because they have different wool characteristics and they're unclassed. So unclassed mobs are more susceptible because we haven't taken out those animals that have got those conformational issues, like we talked about with the shoulders, that makes them more susceptible. Class sheep are generally less susceptible to fly strike, as they have been bred and retained, because they've got the favourable characteristics and the structure that we like. Unclassed sheep will include cull sheep, which in turn include those removed because of the wool and the conformational traits which predispose them to fly strike. And that all makes sense, doesn't it? Ewes with different lambing or crutching or shearing dates, as well as their lamb and weaners, will have higher risk than those with tight lambing windows. So the risk profile of a mob will vary depending on when the sheep are crutched and shorn and when they lamb. So if you think about it, protracted or different lambing times can extend the period that the ewes and the lambs and weaners can be susceptible to the fly strike, to the production cycle. So protracted lambing means we've got delayed lamb marking, we've got a decreased ability to, for the opportunity to provide preventive treatments to both the lambs and the ewes. And I know producers last year got really caught out by this, so it makes it a lot harder for us to do these kind of things. And it also, moving lamb marking from a low risk time of year to a high risk time of year also is a real challenge for us, which is why we want to do things really tight and execute our production programs on time. So let's have a look how you can prevent fly strike. Remember, to avoid the panic, prevention is always better than cure. We want to get on the attack. And part of that is to have an integrated fly strike management plan with a broad ranging of tools that helps minimize strike and minimize over-reliance on chemicals. We definitely don't want to just play one card in the deck. So, preventative activities which help reduce the risk of fly strike will include, starting from the top, classing and land marking, which removes sheep that are more susceptible to fly strike, as well as using the high-risk sheep and docking tails to the optimal length, when marking. So shearing and crutching to reduce wool length so that the wool dries out more quickly, particularly around the breech. This also reduces the prevalence of dags, and this is a great one. It's a real free kick. Applying preventative chemicals to sheep to protect against strike is one of our key, prevention activities. Also, we want to reduce the amount of scaring and the risk of scaring, which causes dags, again, which the flies like. Then we move on to some of the other things we don't normally think about. Careful selection of paddocks and reducing the fly populations. And we're going to go through these one by one now. Classing. The aim of classing is to identify animals which are more susceptible to fly strike or have been struck in the past and remove these from the flock. By doing so, you increase the resistance or resilience of your flock. In the long term, you want to breed an animal that is less susceptible to fly strike. We're not going to go too much into this today, but it's really exciting that AWI's Fly Strike Extension Program is developing a one-day workshop called Classify, which is coming soon, which is going to look at the longer term, the strategic way to class and breed your way forward. Traits that you want to remove from your flock when classing sheep include, we want to reduce high body and breech wrinkle, long breech wool cover, yellow wool cover, fleece rot and dermatitis, high scaring and dags, high worm egg counts, horned animals, previously struck sheep, and any issues with conformation and structure that might predispose. So these are the ones we want to find the animals in our flock. They're going to be the highest risk, and we want to vote them off the island. So MLA and AWI have got a visual score guide, which is some really good examples about the type of sheep which will be, higher risk of fly strike. And you can see here as we've moved from breech wrinkle to dags to urine stain and to breech cover, we can see that animals here, that if you sit on these scores at 3 or above, you're much greater risk of fly strike. And so we can use these guides to help us, find guidelines to help us reduce the amount of, fly strike in our flock. Like I said before, the Classify workshop is being developed by AWI, and it looks into making classing, selection, and joining decisions to improve these scores and breed naturally fly strike resistant and profitable sheep. Landmarking and mulesing. If you deem the fly strike in your sheep is high and they require mulesing, we want to do it, and we want to do the best practice possible. There's 2 really good resources available from AWI that help with this. First one is a training guide to help you plan, prepare, and conduct the best welfare landmarking procedures on the left. And the second resource is a booklet that provides assistance when planning non-mules merino enterprise, shown on the right. So another preventative, long-term preventive activity is docking tails to the optimum tail length when landmarking. Tail, wool and skin that's stained or wet from urine and feces can attract flies. We all know that. There is an optimum tail length, which helps channel urine and feces away from the breech area. This minimizes the stain around the breech and reduces fly strike risk throughout the sheep's life. It also helps prevent prolapse, which I commonly see as a vet particularly in feedlots, but also commonly in sheep with very short tails, and protects the soft tissue from cancers caused by sun exposure on the vulva. And we've all seen that in ewes that have been docked too short. So whereabouts is it? Where are we talking about? We're talking about docking immediately below the 3rd or 4th palpable spot. And palpable is just a fancy way of saying it's really easily felt. Again, the question I get asked is, males and females, should there be a different length? And the answer is no. Just keep it simple and do the same length. Length, why is this important? One, it means there's enough muscle there to so that the sheep can lift its tail high in the air, which means it creates a vertical tension on the breech skin, which creates a real channel for urine to help it get away from the body and not get caught up in the wool around the area. So this next short-term preventive activity is shearing and crutching. These activities can provide up to 6 weeks protection from body and breech fly strike. If the sheep are scaring, it's not nearly as good, which is why we need to look at reducing the incidence of scaring and dags. Shearing and crutching should be planned to coincide with the start or just before the usual start of your fly season, which will be different depending on where you are and when your rainfall pattern is. Why do we do this? This is to reduce the number of susceptible sheep when the flies become active after winter. This is particularly important for lambing ewes that have more stain around their breech. Again, a lot of times those fly waves come in, they're like a little snowball that turns into the avalanche. What we're trying to do here, we're trying to reduce the number of susceptible individuals at the start and keep that snowball as small as possible. So when we're thinking about this, we know that shearing and crutching gives us, 6 weeks. It gives us a great free kick. So we should be thinking about the timing of these activities and how they will fit in a broader program. Insecticides can be used in combination with other preventative activities to deter flies, but again, we know that we shouldn't be relying about one card in the deck, and we don't want to use just the chemical options. Generally, chemicals are registered to be either preventatives or to treat struck animals, which we generally call dressings. Some chemicals only provide protection and won't kill maggots. So we're going to talk about a little bit later, but the key message is, when we do this, we want to be using the right chemical for the right tool and follow label instructions. Applying preventative chemicals. The use of preventative chemicals is a short-term tactical tool providing protection from fly strike between 4 to 29 weeks. And we know this is going to be, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but we know this will be variable where you are and what your activities are on farm. Most pesticides will affect the nervous system of the insects in some way. Each is a little bit different on how it works. Preventative chemicals, basically, as they give you a kind of broad stroke, is that means that they have a residual, which means they can continue to affect the maggots and flies which make contact with them, however, whenever the time of application. So the chemicals will start to wear off and become less effective over time. So where possible, we want to time our applications to extend the protection period. For example, if you shear in early December, applying a preventative chemical 6 weeks later in mid-January will help protect the sheep when the wool becomes long again. So again, we're trying to create bigger windows of protection and not use chemicals alone to do that. Effective chemical use is crucial to ensuring the chemicals you have continue to be as effective as possible and really kind of give you the protection that you hope. So effective chemical application means you select the right chemical for the job. There are different chemicals, as we know, and their uses will be covered shortly. So we want to apply the chemical using the right application method. Using the right application method is using the applicator that comes with the chemical, as this has been approved for use, as well as application pattern, for example, pole to the tail, backline, to the side, etc. Again, we've got to use the tools in the way they were designed for. We want to use the right dosage. Don't guess and make sure you fill the applicator to the correct dosage each time. Half dosing because the applicator didn't fill or you didn't do it properly. Again, these all contribute. They're all little 1%ers that contribute to fly strike and also the resistance of chemicals. The other one is probably to make sure that you're using the appropriate, that the wool length is appropriate for the chemical being used. And again, that'll be on the label. So some chemicals can go straight off shears, some short wool and some are long wool. Remember, this is all part of the planning process. And I know, sometimes a lot of us feel looking at the label as cheating, but actually it's really the first thing we can do because again, the subtleties in the label and how that chemical is used actually does make a big difference to the outcomes, we're paying good money for and our time, which is probably, as a resource that's probably under most pressure, our time is the one. So we really want to make sure when we do a job, we're executing and we're moving forward and don't have to come back as much. So I suppose it's important to understand which chemical you will use as a preventative treatment. So there's different chemicals groups and there's different actives within the group. So there's also application methods for chemicals will vary depending on which chemical it is and different wool lengths as well. As you can see kind of coming through here. So some chemicals that will provide prevent fly strike are also used for lice as well, which is a real challenge. And this is probably the bigger picture we're talking about coming through is that we've got to start making a plan going forward. So as you can see, as we go through the table, you can see we've got active chemicals, we've got the groups, then the chemicals, what application methods we have, and then also if they use for lice. And that's really important. Now, the big message I wanted to just go, and this is a great visual graph, so you don't have to get too carried away, is that see how there's chemical groups on the left, but also within the group, there can be multiple chemicals. So when we talk about a little bit later about we want to rotate groups, we've got to make sure we're actually rotating the group. So the color you can see in this picture, not just the chemicals within there, because that's not achieving the rotation we really need to mitigate or minimize chemical resistance. So we've got to be changing the groups, not just the chemicals within the group. Long-term use and over-reliance on just one chemical group, just one color, if you want to follow this picture, for any type of pest control almost always results in resistance if good resistance management plans aren't in place. Again, we keep playing the same card out of the deck. Eventually, our enemy, the fly, will know what's happening and they'll build resistance strategies to deal with that. Some of the chemical groups that we rely on for blowfly control are no longer as effective because blowflies have become resistant to them. A report recently showed that there's some resistance to ceromazine and dicyclonal, as you can see there on the right-hand side on the bottom in the grey. And so there's cross-resistance between these two actives. And you can see here, they're both in the same group of insect growth regulators. So like I said before, we need to be changing groups, not chemicals, not actives within the group. You know, there's been some early recorded cross-resistance between, other groups as well, dicyclonal and imidacloprid, but some of that's limited. But I suppose the thing I think about more and more and more is that we know these resistance things happen in environment, in biology. So we know it's going to happen. Let's, chance favors the prepared. And let's get on the attack now and put strategies in place now to get the longest out of our chemicals as much as possible. So what happens with resistance is that it reduces the effectiveness of preventative chemicals and treatments and dressings over time. I always like to think, my personal joke is that I've been giving myself a sublethal dose of alcohol since I was about 16. So of course now all of us, when we started drinking, now as adults, we can drink more alcohol because the same kind of thing. We didn't really do the job properly in the first time, and now we've got resistance to it. And our flies are exactly the same. So if you wool growers, if you've got resistance already on your property, this could result in shorter periods of protection than what you would normally expect, rather than complete loss of effectiveness. So resistance typically, it doesn't mean it won't work, it just means it won't work as well. So it's important to understand chemical groups and active chemicals and not just brand names, and ensure you use different chemical groups. Like I said before, we want to be using different groups and not the same active within the group, but also sometimes there'll be a lot of different labels. It's kind of like Coke and Cola. They're the same thing, Forex Gold and, mid-strength, they're the same thing, they're beer. So you've got to be really careful that you're not just swapping different labels, but the same active or the same group. So if flies are resistant to one product, they will also be resistant to another, especially, and the same with our drenches, if both products contain the same active chemical. Also be aware that some products have very similar names and contain the same active, and we just talked about there. So we've got to really kind of check the label, on what you're using. So there are two indicators of resistance. If you're worried about if I have resistance, one, the indicators you'll see will be one, a shortening of the protection period that is specified in the product labels, despite no change in application rate. You're happy the chemical was applied, correctly applied, and there's no significant differences in season outlook or fly pressure. For example, rather than 10 to 14 weeks of protection, you might start seeing signs of fly strike after 4 to 6 weeks. These are the start of the signs you might be having a resistance problem. Fly strike, the other one I would commonly see would be fly strike in multiple sheep that have been treated with the same chemical, rather than just a few, the odd sheep. Maggots surviving and causing and continue to cause strike again, despite the confidence, and you've got to be confident the chemical is applied properly. So, with resistance, the key message is, doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means you'll be losing the effectiveness, and you've got to recalibrate your strategies accordingly. So if you think chemical resistance is already a problem on your property, you need to work on further limiting the development of resistance. Again, either way, the idea is that if it's either a problem for you or if it's not, we know that resistance develops. So it's all about getting a plan in place. We want to slow that progression down. Resistance testing is everything you've heard. We've got some documents for wool growers to help understand that, but also it includes contact details for resistance testing. Now, there is testing available for resistance, and I'll just show you if you can see the camera. There's some kits available, from New South Wales DPI, or if you need help, there's, consultants like me can help you look at what resistance is on your farm. And there's a fact sheet available how to organise testing, but a lot of consultants can help you with this as well. So good chemical use will prolong the effectiveness of the chemicals we have available for fly strike. Rotating chemicals is a good practice to help with this, and there are 3 considerations when it comes to rotation. 1. Consider the chemical group that was last applied, either earlier this season or at the end of the previous fly season, and where practical, avoid using a chemical from the same group next. Next one, consider the chemical group that was last used to control lice and avoid a chemical from the same group for the next preventative fly strike application in the same season. Again, I like these, and I will signpost where you can find this stuff. It's at wool.com. But some of these pictures, if you just follow the colors, I think it's really easy to follow what group is, what are the chemical actives in what group. And of course, consider the chemical groups that were last applied to prevent fly strike, and avoid using these as dressings to treat struck sheep this season. Again, it's kind of like a box that we want to throw as many different combinations at our flies as possible. So chemical resistance can be complex, and effectively using chemicals to minimize resistance can be challenging. It's not really, so if you're sitting there confused and a bit nervous, that's okay, that's completely normal. AWI has developed a range of resources that can help you understand and manage chemical resistance. So a lot of what I'm talking about is included in these resources. So there's an A3 in there on standing operating procedures that help covers effective chemical application. This poster is designed to be on farm in the shed. There's a guide that provides a summary of the chemical groups and actives that are available to use for the prevention and treatment of fly strike. And a lot of rural resellers are really good at this kind of stuff as well. There's a fact sheet on chemical resistance that includes information on how to arrange for testing. There's a guide to chemical rotation, a decision support tool, that helps you. I really like these kind of things. Anyone seen the lambing planner? It's something similar to that. It's really, really good. And it can just help you kind of make simple sense of these strategies we're talking about. Now, all of them can be downloaded or ordered in hard copy from www.wool.com/demystify. But I just went there this morning. If you just go in the search bar of wool.com and type demystify, then you'll find all those resources, and they're super easy. It takes 2 seconds to download. So we've talked about classing, shearing and crutching, and providing preventative chemicals to the sheep to protect against strike. Now it's time to consider some of our other strategies. So reducing scaring risk and dags. This is a big one. Scaring causes dags to form rapidly. Dags can then cause the wool and the skin around the breech to stay moist and warm, and then we know that's going to create an odor which the female fly is looking to lay eggs in. This environment provides suitable site for female flies to lay eggs and for maggots to develop. And this is how the snowball turns into the avalanche. Preventing scaring and dag formation is an important step to improve animal welfare on one point, but also reduce the risk of breech strike. So worms can cause scaring, particularly for the Victorians. Worms can cause scaring, so controlling the risk of scaring is an important preventative activity. So we want to do lots of fecal egg counts and drench when required. This spring going forward, I think for everyone, I think we really need to be on the attack, and monthly fecal egg counts I think are really on point for this year, because it's going to be a big year for it. So we want to make sure, again, with all our chemical use, we're drenching and we're using the right drench for the job, and we're using the right dose. Again, shortchanging your animals and yourself by, dialing the gun back doesn't help you in the long term. It actually minimizes everything, and minimizes production so much that any gains you're getting in cost savings get blown out by loss of your production, your opportunity cost. Remember, we want to rotate drenches and use multi-actives. And there's a whole heap of resources on wormboss.com.au about how to again, building strategies on how to minimize resistance development and how to attack it at when it occurs. And of course, the final one, when we do need to step in, a lot of times I talk about, we can either When we know what's happening in our paddocks and on our animals, we can choose as managers to step in, and we can manage this situation in terms of, feeding, or we can manage our expectations. If we decide to step in and help our animals out nutritionally, then we need to avoid sudden changes in diet, because we know that if we suddenly change to a high carbohydrate, high grain diet, we can get scarring. So we want to go softly, and get advice on how to do it. So if you live in an area where there is high risk of DAGs occurring, having a breeding objective to lower DAGs will be worthwhile to consider. So this is something I've never thought about previously, but I think it's becoming more and more important in my mind as we put it in the broader context of a strategy. Remember, we're trying to think strategically now. Putting more susceptible sheep in certain paddocks is another key prevention activity. We want to select paddocks that mitigate the environmental factors that contribute to fly strike and avoid hot spots that encourage activity. So this might include paddocks that are more open and exposed to wind. We said at the start, flies hate wind. So having those exposed paddocks, they might be terrible for lambing, but they might actually be really good for your weaners to minimize the risk of fly strike. We want to avoid timber and wet areas, and we want to have paddocks that have a low worm risk, particularly for our weaners. So I think about this in the same way we know that by selecting lambing paddocks, we get better outcomes. By acknowledging and knowing that we've got more susceptible animals, putting them in paddocks that will be less conducive to fly strike is one little thing we can do. It's another 1% we can do, because we know that fly activity will be reduced in these paddocks and the sheep will dry out more quickly. And we know that if we put them in low worm risk paddocks, this will help prevent scarring. So reducing the prevalence of flies, we're going to talk about that now. So we know the Australian sheep blowfly female prefer to lay its eggs on live sheep. So we know that damp, smelly wool is their ideal environment. That's their jam. So within 12 to 24 hours, the eggs will hatch into maggots, larvae, which grow on feeding on the sheep through the wounds, the existing striates, and any kind of weeping skin and exudative kind of stuff. So the maggots will drop off the sheep after about 3 to 5 days and burrow into the ground at about 1 to 4 centimetres to pupate before emerging as immature flies about a week later. So the soil temperature needs to be about 15 degrees for this to really kind of kick on. To reach reproductive maturity and produce eggs, adult female flies need a source of protein. Sources of protein include exudate from the wounds, existing strikes, weepy skin, carcasses, and protein-rich manure. So other fly species that cause that secondary infection we talked about briefly may use these sources of protein to lay eggs and hatch maggots. But blowfly really wants that live sheep. So to reduce the presence of flies, again, we want to attack it, keep the snowball from turning into the avalanche. We want to remove the flies from the equation, which can contribute to preventing fly strike in the first place. Although reducing susceptibility to sheep has a larger role to play in fly strike prevention. So again, this is not the silver bullet. This is all part of the bigger strategy. Steps you can do to remove the presence of flies. First one, remove and dispose of infected material and carcasses of sheep that have died from fly strike. We want to eliminate, again, the flies need the protein. We eliminate the sources of protein, ideally from burying the carcasses if we can. Carcasses aren't massive. They're not a massive part of the life cycle of the Australian sheep blowfly. However, sometimes if that animal has died and there's resistant maggots in there, then those maggots can continue the development. So this is a big one, and everyone's going to hate it because it's another chore, but collecting maggots from wool clippings when you've treated an animal is also really important. It's not something we really think about, and it is a bit grotty and a bit gross, but again, we're trying to reduce the number of maggots and flies, because we know those females can go on and they can lay 300 eggs per ovulation cycle. So even a couple of maggots can actually turn into a lot of flies really quickly, which is why we see fly storms. They really kind of come in fly waves. And this is the other big one, and we don't think about as well, is that flies generally don't travel far. Only about 3 kilometers. So everything you do on your farm and at isolated sites and at your property level actually will make a significant difference to the level of fly strike on your property. So, your efforts actually really can get on the attack and make a big difference. So importantly, these activities can help reduce fly populations, and we really want to time them before the first emergence of the flies, from the pupa stage, not just within the fly season. So what that tells me is just constantly stay on the attack. Don't let your foot off the accelerator on trying to get this, especially at the start of the season. It'll make a big difference. So everyone, that covers the range of prevention activities. Again, we're trying to put a package together. It's a combination. It's like a boxer. The more combinations we can throw at our flies, the better chance we have of reducing those three main components of the fly strike. Now, one thing I love to do, at the end of any management decision is, to reassess your management plan and make changes where necessary. What went well? What didn't go well? What did we learn? And what can we put in place for next year or the next time we find this kind of season? What can we do better? We can always do things better. And which animals get struck and which didn't. And they're starting to record these things and really kind of debrief them about what's happening and how do we move forward and how do we build management practices. So take to the farm messages, well-timed preventive activities can help reduce the risk of fly strike. Sometimes some types of classes of sheep are more susceptible to fly strike and should be targeted for preventive treatment, and a well thought out integrated fly strike management program is required. So remember, no single prevention activity should be relied upon alone, and monitoring activities, which we're going to talk about next, are really important. So again, prevention, monitoring, treatment. So we might even keep moving on, Fiona, if that's okay, and then we'll come through to some questions in a little bit.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Tim.
So now we're going to look at monitoring activities to control fly strike. So during this section, I'm going to cover a number of key activities in relation to monitoring fly strike, which includes why monitoring is important and the role it plays in short-term fly strike management, how to monitor for fly strike, and signs of fly strike. So why is monitoring important? Monitoring is important tool for wool growers to use, particularly when conditions indicate the risk of fly strike. The aim of monitoring should be to detect and deal with fly strike as soon as possible. Again, we want to attack, keep it from turning into avalanche, keep it at the snowball level. Doing so means that you stop the fly strike from worsening in individual animals and prevent the suffering of further animals, prevent the fly populations from increasing and fly strike spreading to your entire flock. We want to keep it small. Prevention is better than cure. And of course, avoid the negative impacts on wool production, condition, fertility, growth. We've done all these hard yards on our flock. We want to mitigate the production impacts. And we know it costs a lot of money, those impacts, not just the treatment costs. So monitoring for fly strike really means monitoring for the conditions for fly strike. So remember, we need the presence of susceptible sheep, the presence of flies, and favourable weather conditions. Therefore, we want to monitoring strike in sheep. That's a really big one. Monitoring fly populations and monitoring weather conditions. So regularly checking mobs of sheep and carefully looking for susceptible sheep and signs of fly strike is an important part of fly management. This is particularly important activity when favourable conditions of fly to occur. Again, I know it's another job, but if we keep the problem small, we'll keep the problem small. Not only will this allow you to identify and deal with struck sheep, but allows you to get a feel for the severity of the fly strike event. So again, it's not about bringing them into the yards every time, but it's all about keep going around the paddocks and keeping a look at them and making sure we're keeping an idea of what's going on. If we see any struck sheep, remember, the flies are attracted to a struck animal. We want to remove them from the animal because they can act as a magnet and put our other animals at risk. So, but if you've got a lot of sheep, then maybe bringing in the mob will be the best thing, and that's what we're talking about here. Again, trying to get on the attack and, stop it turning into an avalanche. So I think we're all familiar with the signs of fly strike. The first one is covert fly strike. And, this is when small areas of fly strike that cannot be detected easily are quite common. And, these are the covert fly strikes. Covert strikes can last a couple of weeks before advancing into the more obvious fly strike during warm, moist conditions. Then the next one is, our early detectable fly strike. Early signs of fly strike, which should be noted in our monitoring program, include, patches of wool that appear discolored from chewing and rubbing. These generally don't have large strike wounds, but will typically become progressively darker with more exudate and weeping. And again, that's what attracts more flies, and that's what the maggots feed on. Sheep will behave differently at this stage because they're uncomfortable and irritated. They may twitch their tail, bite, scratch, stomp their feet, and think, they're the kind of common symptoms. So again, as soon as you start seeing this, we know that the snowball's rolling. I suppose start by treating all the struck sheep, and then have a think about why this is occurring. And this gives you a first kind of idea of, is this inside my protection period for my chemical? Am I getting some resistance here? Is this just a poor conformation animal, or is this like, the canary in the mine, something big's about to happen? If the strike appears to be affected more than one particularly susceptible sheep, consider where strike occurred, due to management area. Is that something that's on us, or is this a really high risk period? The weather conditions really favorable. And now the advanced fly strike. This is the bad one. We know about it. This is more obvious. The wounds are larger, and there's a lot of whole body effects in the sheep, including fever, potentially sepsis and shock. Our wounds are going to be from advanced strike. They're large, they're dark, they're smelly. Our animal will be really, really sick. The animal will be out on its own. So without treatment, these animals can get, obviously at high risk of death or being really, really sick and uncomfortable. So, get on the attack. These animals need to be treated, and things like, antibiotics and pain relief injections and those kind of things really will pay dividends for these animals. So monitor conditions that are required. That's what we're talking about. We're looking at the sheep, but what about our flies? Adult flies, again, they don't normally travel more than 3 k's. So places like sheep camps, watering points, they can act as epicenters for infection. Why? Because that's where the maggots are dropping off the sheep. The sheep are hanging out there, so it makes sense that the maggots are falling off and the pupae are living in those, in those areas. Some growers can use traps, to assist with monitoring, and they should be regularly checked if you're going to be using. But again, monitoring the sheep, because that's where the action really is. So when monitoring fly populations, I think this picture illustrates what the blowfly looks like, and I think that's what we're trying to find out. Is this the animal? Is this the fly that we're dealing with? Egg-bearing females are, I think everyone's familiar with what maggots are, but they really can go so the maggots drop off the sheep at about 3 days. So it's about 13 millimeters to give you an idea what's happening and how long they've been struck for. And again, they can come out in a week. So, we talked about 2 of the 3. Now, the third one is weather conditions. Again, constant wet weather is really what happens. Flyboss has got this great little picture that can give you an idea of the risk, for fly strike. And this is a national map. But, I suppose when we looked at the take-home farm messages is that it's all about getting on the attack early. Regular monitoring activities will help you detect signs of fly strike in sheep, as well as the conditions which may favour fly strike. Finding these as early as possible will help prevent severe infections. Monitoring involves a combination of checks, including looking for fly strike in sheep, checking populations of flies, and checking weather conditions. Again, we're trying to think about what are the tactical conditions in front of us. So now we've kind of gone through this pretty quickly, and I know we're on a timeline, so I'll just keep pushing through because I just want to really cover this treatment before we get around to the questions. So now, treatment. Treating fly strike is essential to protect the health and welfare of our flock. And again, we want to break the life cycle of flies and prevent those economic losses on a broader scale. This is a flock problem. So how do we treat fly struck sheep? So steps to follow is that one is we want to clean up the strike area. This means the area of the strike wound, but also the area around it. We want to remove the struck wool by clipping the wool on and around the affected area and clip the wool close to skin. A handpiece is generally better than hand shears because we want to remove all that really kind of matted and dank wool because that's what the flies love. That's what attracts them. We want to think about 5 centimeters or or one blow from a handpiece of clean wool around the area, because we know they can trail out and we want to attack those maggots. If you find maggot trails, just follow them, exterminate them. Many maggots may escape treatment if we're not careful. So again, maggot turns into a female lay 300 eggs per ovulation cycle, which can happen every 4 to 8 days. So actually what you do for that one individual animal actually will make a big difference and prevent that, that fly wave. It's important to collect as many maggots as possible during the treatment and kill them. So don't just kicking wool clippings and it all on the ground, because we want to put the maggots into a plastic bag and seal it, especially if we've got resistance developing. Those maggots might be there because they are a bit stronger than everyone else and can handle more chemical. We want to grab them, bag them, and let the sun kill them. So, and then the next thing after that is to dress the affected area. Dressing the infected area is using a suitable registered chemical to prevent the wound from being restruck while it's healing. Remember, it's still going to exudate. The flies are still going to, smell it and want to get there. So after dressing the wound, you want to move the struck sheep to a hospital paddock, if possible. And why is this? Why do we go to the effort? Because we want to reduce the risk of attracting flies to the rest of the flock. Providing these treated sheep with fresh feed, water, shelter, maybe some other sheep to keep them keep them comfortable and monitor them regularly. Particularly if they're super sick, we want to make sure that we're giving them medications and taking care of them as much as possible. Make sure you follow all the steps described here, because we want to effectively treat struck sheep. And why do we want to do that? One, it's for our animals, but one, we want to prevent additional strikes and avoid the development of resistance to chemicals. Remember, these really struck sheep, the maggots on that could be the carriers of the, the next wave of resistance. We want to grab them, bag them, and kill them. So in summary, when it comes to treating fly-struck sheep, we make sure you use a combination of treatment activities. Again, we want to clip them and clean them. We just don't want to do one thing alone. It's important to make sure all fly-struck sheep are effectively treated, all maggots are killed, and all sources of protein are removed to aid, one, the sheep's recovery, but to prevent additional strikes on that animal, but also to prevent the fly populations. One of the 3 things that are essential for fly waves and fly-struck sheep, we want to reduce that population and attack it at the maggot level. Treatment of fly strike should be considered as part of the larger fly strike management plan. Again, it all bolts in together, which incorporates prevention and monitoring activities, as we've heard about today. So we're going fast and furious now, but I just wanted to really bring it holistically back, and then I'm going to talk about the exciting things in the pipeline coming forward. 1, prevention, monitoring, treatment activities are all put together to help their animals, but also preventing fly strike is the key. We want to have an integrated plan for prevention. Again, we want to have multiple cards in the deck we want to play. So that's, prevention, monitoring, treatment, and review it regularly. No single preventative, monitoring, or treatment activity can be relied upon alone. It's a team sport. You want to get them all together. It's a strategy. We're thinking long term. These need to consider the sheep, the flies, and the weather holistically. Thank you very much. We're going fast and furious, but this is probably what I wanted. What I'm really excited about is what's in the pipeline from AWI initiatives. Some of these are available now, and some will be available coming forward. So this is the one you're on right now. It's Fly Time, the 1-hour webinar to kind of give you the basics, really, leading into high fly strike risk periods. And this is what we've covered really quickly. Now, demystify. This is the practical information for wool growers and advisors, because I know there'll be some advisors listening regarding managing blowfly chemical resistance. There's some great resources there. Like I said before, if you go to wool.com and type in the search bar demystify, that word there, it's great. It'll take you 2 seconds to download all those resources and print them out. They're great things to have on hand. So, Simplify. This is a 1-day workshop help to develop a strategic fly strike management plan and an annual calendar. the thing I like about this workshop, you walk away with something tangible, you can implement on farm. This will integrates many of the tools. So we're kind of taking a little bit of theory and a bit more we've talked about today and put them into an actual plan for you to use in your fly strike period. And these are rolling out right now, across Australia. Classify. This is one, again, this is in the pipeline. This is, watch this space. This will be a one-day workshop to increase skills and awareness in breeding improved natural fly resistance. Again, we're trying to go from what are the tactical tools, and plans, and now what about going forward the long term? Stratifly, again, this is building these things up. This is a one-day workshop, again, in the pipeline to develop a whole of farm plan, moving to a non-mules merino enterprise. Again, so giving you the tools you need to kind of go forward. And the final one that's coming through is Amplify. And this will be for producers who want a greater level of support. This will be a one-on-one coaching and support program to implement your on-farm plan for moving to a non-mules merino enterprise. We all know it's when you're trying to implement a lot of change, a one-day workshop is really, really hard to do things, which is why AWI's Lifetime Ewe Management is such a good program, because we've got regular visits and we can kind of put it all together over a longer time. Amplifiers, again, give you a high level of support going forward. Guys, that's coming in again. So this is their Fly Strike Extension program that's coming through. I'm really excited about this. It's going to really make a lot of impact. Again, wool.com, Fly Strike Resources will have all of this. It's 1:59. I scrambled 1 minute under the buzzer. So we'll fire up with some questions if you want to stay online. And thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, good job. It certainly is. Fly Time's a wonderful presentation, but it is an awful lot of stuff to fit into 1 hour. So you did really, really well there, Tim.
Thank you.
It's not too late, everyone, to ask questions, but I have just a couple that have come through to kick us off, Tim, while everyone else gets to hopefully a bit more enthusiastic about question time. The first question is, I have a dodgy printer. Can I get the hard copies of the AWI booklet / resources you put up on screen as hard copies?
Yeah, 100%. Great question, Fiona. Yeah, we definitely can get AWI can definitely get you those hard copies if you want. I know if you're a tactile learner like me, you really need to see, touch, and feel. And certainly, contacting AWI, you can get all those things sent out to you. If you're not a big printer person, no, that's easy.
Yeah, great question. I'm a bit of a hard copy girl as well.
Yeah, me too.
Next question is about your chemicals that you spoke about. So confirming, so unlike the drenches that I use for worms, which I need to use now in combination, I just have to rotate for flies, correct?
Yeah, at this stage, the best thing you can do is to rotate the chemical groups. So like we said before, and again, the demystify, if you look there, you'll see the chemical groups and then the actives. And then if you go into your rural reseller, you can help find what groups go in there. So yeah, you want to be rotating chemical groups as much as possible for your flies and lice. Again, it's trying to kind of move together. A lot of the preventive chemicals we use for lice and flies are actually the same one. So we want to make sure we're kind of moving the chemical groups as much as possible. Yep, great question.
The last question I have, actually, guys, so if you have any other questions coming through, please send them through now. The last question I have here, Tim, is the new workshop you spoke about. How can I find out more information and register for it?
Oh, excellent question. Depending on what state you're in, your extension body, so in New South Wales, we've got Sheep Connect New South Wales. Go online there, go onto their Facebook or their website, and all those informations about those workshops will be present for you, because there's a lot rolling in. I know if you're in New South Wales, there's a whole stack of them rolling across the state. So like I said before, I think one of the best things about some of these workshops coming through is it actually gives you something tangible. I know I'm guilty of going to a workshop or going to a webinar or something like that and go, oh, how good's that? And a week later, I can't remember what they talked about. The best thing about Simplify is actually you walk away with something in your hand that you can execute. And I think it's a great one-day rollout.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. A couple of questions coming through now. Do you tend to see fly strike in sheep with very short tails?
Very short tails. I think the tail length, the challenge with that is that you will get, if they don't have a lot of muscle there, then certainly you can, with dags and things like that, you can get increased fly strike with short tails because they don't have enough. If they lift their tail, they're not creating enough channel to kind of get particularly the urine away from the body. And I think one thing for the tail length thing is that, it's not just the fly strike, it's the prolapses, it's the cancers, there's all kinds of things. So that's why it's so important that to dock those animals at the 3 to 4 joint. It's really important because, again, they can, the tail is kind of acts like a bit of a trapdoor, and the muscle attachments can attach to the tail, and so they can kind of create that channel and get it out. So yes, certainly that's why we talk about docking those tails at the right length, because it really, again, what can we control in our environment? We can't control the weather, and that's one of the 3, but we can control our susceptible individuals, and tail length is part of, I suppose, the risk profile of our animals. Great question.
Next question, is there a maggot sampling strategy needed for the testing to determine chemical resistance?
Yes, great question. Because you really, this is a kit here. Actually, I've got a stack of them, but you do need to be a little bit prepared because you need to have, I suppose, what would I call this? Maggot fertilizer. You do actually have to have this on hand. So I think in the Demystify, if you go and look on that, there's a handout there that will talk about where you go to get these kind of things, because you want to have it on hand, and there's an actual protocol about what you do to your struck animal, how do you get the maggots, and where do you send them? And yeah, again, I think as we kind of go forward, drench resistance testing, fly resistance testing, we want to get on the attack and start understanding what's happening on our farm, because what you do on farm with your fly management strategies will dictate to a large degree what your resistance level is. Remember, our flies don't go more than 3 kilometers. So what you do on farm, different to buying in resistant worms, what you do on farm will really make a big difference.
Another question's just come through. Are there grower groups available that can support me if I do have a chemical resistant problem?
Oh, I'm not sure about grower groups. I think there's a lot of resources, and I would say that going along to speaking to a rural reseller, getting a consultant in to help you, and there's plenty of sheep consultants getting around, or even just getting yourself to a Simplify workshop. Typically, I find at those workshops, you're dealing with producers in the same neck of the woods facing a lot of the challenges. And I think at those events, you actually can find a lot of support within your, I suppose, your grower group. But I'm not quite sure, Fiona, if there are a specialized fly strike resistance grower groups. I think that's probably part of the Simplify workshops aim, is to kind of put it all together and help you deal with those things. Are you aware of that? Sorry, Fiona?
Yeah, no, I'm not aware of any grower groups that are around, but I do agree that these workshops will hopefully start to form some of those as well and get farmers together that have similar problems. So maybe watch this space one there for that question. Well, that's all our questions for today there, Tim. So I'm just going to swap our screens over now. There we go. Thanks everybody for joining in today, and we'll just get this next screen up. I'd really appreciate it if you fill our follow-up survey in. It's going to be launched as soon as this presentation's over. I think I've put 5 questions in today, really short questions, so thank you in advance for your feedback, and the recording will be available on the YouTube channel shortly, so watch that space. And a bit of a save the date for the next webinar. The regos aren't up and out yet, but spring has nearly sprung. It certainly has in my section of the northern New South Wales, and what a cracking season across many, many states. So we're going to do a multi-species parasite update on the 20th of September at 1 p.m. And this is also a little bit of a heads up, going to include some really exciting new website developments for Paraboss. So please watch this space, and I look forward to you all joining us then. So thank you once again, Tim. It's been wonderful to have you on board the Paraboss webinar series, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Great. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. Bye for now.